I can't believe it. We're back to Go-Go Loser Ranger after all this time. And after all this time, I have to say, it's one of the most selfish animes I think I've ever seen in my life. But before I get into my claim and also my positive and negatives I do have with the show after the season ending, I do also want to go over the story real fast. Go-Go Loser Ranger seemingly takes place with the normal 5 Rangers that you usually get in any regular Power Ranger show, but the twist is that it actually doesn't start any of them because apparently that they're all evil. The main character actually is the villain, the little monsters, the grubbers that are... I said the grubbers, what the fuck? The minions that are usually around the big boss but aren't at the specific moment in time because all the bosses are dead as hell. From the Rangers, and the minions are basically forced to make it look like the bosses are still alive and they're still technically speaking attacking humanity, just so the Rangers have all this clout and popularity for the end of time basically. But one of the minions by the name of Fighter D doesn't want to do this shit anymore. He basically wants to rebel and actually kill all the Rangers. But enough with the story, let me at least get into the positives and negatives. The positive I really do have is everybody has a fucking narrative. Every single person in this show has their own goal and they'll do any and anything to achieve their goal, whether that be achieving a higher rank in a ranger status, or whether that be being the top ranger itself, or whether that be world domination, chopping off limbs, losing your identity, coercing with a whole monster that wants to actually destroy the world. Like, this world is so selfish. I'm borderline surprised that this world is even intact. But believe it or not, that's actually one of the best things about the show, because since everyone has a narrative, it's a surprise when anyone does anything, or when you see someone do a certain action or a certain act just to get ahead of the current position that they're in right now. And just to confirm with everyone out there, I'm not saying it's bad to have your own goal and aspirations, but these motherfuckers will easily throw you to the wolves if they have the chance to, with there only being a small few that wouldn't actually necessarily do that. But the people I really want to get into in their big narratives throughout this whole show, the first one being easily the most interesting one, and you know what, I'll make it a package deal, is the one with Fighter D, who's the main character, as well as Hibiki. With Fighter D wanting to basically kill all the Rangers, like I said before, and doing anything in that process of doing it, he has a few traits with him that sort of messes him up on that way of doing it, which is selflessness and arrogance. And the main one I'm going to get to in a second, which is just his gullibleness, with the added bonus of the 2 people that are helping him, which is Hibiki as well as Yumiko, who are both humans. But let me at least get into Hibiki and tell you why they're a package deal, right? But so far, Hibiki seems like a man who wears rose-tinted glasses. He doesn't see necessarily any negatives in people. He tries to see the most positives even in monsters. He wants a world that they can both coexist as monsters and humans, while D wants a world domination. And this is the part where it gets interesting, right? So to go a little bit over some story points, so D actually is like pretending to be one of the Rangers. He's pretending to be Hibiki from time to time, and Hibiki eventually finds out that D is actually a monster, and when he finds out that he's a monster, he actually attempts to help him. And on a surface level, it feels like it's on an extremely weird and unconventional way. So Hibiki basically gives D his whole identity. He gives him a list of all his trainees that he's been training up to this point to become actual Rangers. He gives facts about all of them, also gives a whole bunch of insider information when it comes to the base that they all live in, and the whole point is just to make it a game. He says, if you can actually take out all the Rangers before I can actually convert all the Rangers to being good people, then we'll see who gets to go first. Now, this makes the show extremely interesting. This is the turning point of the whole show for me, right? Because this is the point where I think this is Hibiki's master plan to have monsters and humans coexist, 1, and 2, to change the Rangers as a whole, with having Fighter D just basically be the catalyst for everything. I think he wants D to be the catalyst for, 1, making monsters and humans coexist, because I think Hibiki is trying to change D as his character as a whole, him as a person, to him have a different worldview of what he thinks and how he thinks about humans as a whole, but give him insider information, and him having relationships and him having conversations with actual humans and seeing how their mind ticks, which could lead him into being conflicted and wanting to think, oh, maybe I should actually help these humans, maybe I shouldn't do world domination, and maybe him being a catalyst into like leading the other monsters to have his same worldview of being one together and coexisting, which is a hell of a gamble, because if it works then it becomes a new world, but if it doesn't then it's the end of the Rangers. And I think the results of what happens is actually extremely beautiful, that D actually does get conflicted. He does have that thought of like, hey, I actually like these humans, I actually like these people, maybe I shouldn't actually annihilate all of them, or maybe I should change my worldview. But he doesn't change his worldview to Hibiki's. He actually thinks, I should do my own thing. I shouldn't actually look for the monsters. I shouldn't go for the humans. I should just go for what I want to go for. And I feel like the show leads up to this a few times, because he always says he wants world domination, but he doesn't know what to say after he says he wants world domination. It's like getting asked a question of what do you want, and then you're getting asked what do you want to gain out of it. What is the next step after you do this? And with all this free will and space, he actually gets time to think about what he wants himself. And this is the part of D that I love the most. The reason why I love this part of D the most, his decision making, is because it's the most underrated part about himself. himself. People don't think of him as a threat. It's more like a pawn that they can just use for their own means or what they actually want to do with their own goal. But they keep underestimating these decision making, because by the time I feel like we get to the end of the story or just certain big major plot points, they're gonna understand D is actually a really big threat by the time they get to it, and they're not gonna realize it before it's too late. Just like how Blue Ranger even said it himself, and even as they're fighting, he got to the point where like he's fighting Blue Ranger on his own, even though he's a bit tired, but he's still fighting him on a competent level. And by the end of it, it feels like it's 3 parallel lanes that we see. It's one, D's lane, then it's Hibiki's way, and then lastly it's Yumiko's lane. And she's one of the more interesting things about this show as well, because she's one of those characters who's extremely close to like almost being up there as a ranger, but it's come to find out she actually wants to betray all of the rangers as well as go with her own separate worldview. But we don't really get a gist of like why she's doing it. We only get hints and glamour of like why is she necessarily this type of evil. That makes me want to stick around, and every single time she's on the screen, she sort of captivates me in a way of like, okay, what are you planning on doing? What are you going to do now? And the last person I want to go over in his worldview is actually the Red Ranger. He's actually one of the people that's a piece of shit. And if anything, I did see this comment, but I don't fully agree with it, but he's a little bit like it. He's just like sort of one of those evil people, like an evil Superman or like a Homelander a little bit, where he's just psychotic. He just doesn't necessarily care for anything, maybe except for his caste system that he himself has necessarily made, as well as just for some minor stuff that's like a psychotic behavior. Like let's just say when Blue Ranger had necessarily died, he's like, damn, he was one of the more taller people inside the group. I only cared for him because he was tall, and he really helps the figure of the team when we do our poses. Like he's fucking psychotic, he's weird. And what also feels like it's sad to say is like everyone feels like they're falling in line. It does feel like anyone else is as evil, at least to this point. When we see the Pink Ranger or the Blue Ranger, we get sort of their details of who they are as people. They don't really seem like they're evil. It just seems like the Red Ranger is sort of making this whole show continue to keep going. And I'm also assuming if we see more, maybe the Yellow Ranger or the Green Ranger later in the season, that they may even be a little more evil or a little bit more like the Red Ranger does, have a little bit more oomph to it. And what I mean by oomph, I really mean just like showing like, oh, they're really fucking evil. At least half of these people are evil. And another thing I was hinting at before in the beginning of the video of me talking about that's a positive and negative is actually the backstories. Now the backstories, I'll go over the negative first with the backstories. With the backstories as a negative, it'll be times where like it'll be characters like I really don't care for, or I really don't give a fuck about, at least in this moment in time specifically. We get like a 15-second backstory or background that's almost semi-similar to a different other character. And sometimes it felt a little bit meaningless and made me not really care for it. And honestly, it sort of mixes in with a pacing issue that sometimes comes about that because of when the backstories as well as some of the events that is happening inside the story. But the positive I do want to give with the backstory is that it actually amplified some characters that I was seeing, like for example the Blue Ranger. The Blue Ranger, before I was like, man, can we like get some more information or more background of like who the Blue Ranger is as a person and why I should really care? And after I got the backstory and understanding who the Blue Ranger is, I actually give a fuck about him and really care to like, damn, is he actually gonna die? Or if he lives, can he actually become a better or greater person? But after all that, I actually still suggest this show. I think everyone should go ahead and give it a chance. Go ahead and watch Go-Go Loser Ranger. Give it a chance. I think you would actually enjoy it or like it. And other than that, thank you guys for watching, liking, commenting, subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.